You buy the notebook on Monday. By Tuesday, you've already imagined the person you're going to become. You download the course. You open the blank document. You put the new gym shoes beside the door. You make a schedule that looks almost like evidence of a new life. For a few days, you are different. You wake up earlier. You work on the idea. You picture yourself 6 months from now, finally having the skill, the body, the business, the book, the career you kept saying you wanted. And then, quietly, something changes. The work stops feeling exciting. The page stays blank a little longer. You miss one workout. You tell yourself you'll make it up tomorrow. Tomorrow becomes next week. Eventually, the notebook disappears into a drawer. The course remains at 37%. The project sits in a folder you stop opening. Months later, you remember it. And the strange part is this: you still want it. So why did you walk away? The easiest answer is that you weren't disciplined enough. Maybe you didn't want it badly enough. But that explanation leaves something important out. Because sometimes the things we abandon aren't the things we care about least. They're the things we care about enough to make failure uncomfortable. Imagine someone named Daniel. For years, Daniel has wanted to start a YouTube channel. Nothing extraordinary. He isn't dreaming of becoming famous overnight. He simply wants to make videos about something he genuinely cares about. For months, the idea lives safely in his head. He watches other creators. He imagines the videos. He thinks about what his channel could become. And strangely, he feels good. Because inside his imagination, almost anything is still possible. He could become excellent. He could build an audience. He could make something meaningful. Nothing has contradicted the fantasy yet. Then he finally starts. The first video takes 12 hours. He uploads it. 37 views. The second takes even longer. A few people click away after 30 seconds. Then Daniel watches another creator making videos far better than his. Suddenly, the dream feels different. Before, he was someone who could become good. Now he is someone whose work can be judged. That distinction matters. Psychologically, imagined possibilities are protected from evidence. Reality isn't. Once you begin pursuing something, your abilities become visible to other people, but also to yourself. You discover what you're actually good at. You discover what you're terrible at. And sometimes, that is more uncomfortable than failing. Because failure doesn't just threaten the goal. It can threaten the story you have about yourself. Maybe Daniel thought, somewhere in the background, I'm a creative person. If I really tried, I could make something great. As long as he doesn't seriously try, that belief cannot really be tested. But now the video is sitting online. People can ignore it. People can criticize it. And Daniel can look at it and think, maybe I'm not as good as I imagined. So he doesn't quit because he suddenly stopped caring. He quits because caring has made the outcome emotionally expensive. This doesn't explain every case of abandonment. Sometimes people genuinely change their minds. Sometimes a goal was never right for them. Sometimes circumstances make continuing unreasonable. But for some people, avoidance becomes a form of self-protection. And that creates the first contradiction. The more meaningful the goal becomes, the more uncomfortable it can become to discover that you might not reach it. So Daniel delays editing the next video. At first, the reason sounds harmless. I'm tired. I'll do it tonight. I need to figure out the strategy first. He opens a project, sees the unfinished timeline, and feels a familiar pressure in his chest. Then he opens something else. For a few minutes, the pressure disappears. And this is where the pattern becomes powerful. Avoidance doesn't have to feel good in a dramatic way. Sometimes it simply feels like relief. A difficult task creates discomfort. You avoid it. The discomfort drops. That immediate change can reinforce behavior because the brain learns from consequences. You don't need to consciously decide, I am training myself to avoid difficult things. You simply experience. I feel bad when I work on this. I feel better when I stop. And the next time the discomfort appears, stopping becomes easier. This is one reason avoidance can become self-reinforcing. The problem is that the reward arrives immediately, while the cost arrives much later. Relief now, regret later. Daniel doesn't feel the cost when he closes a laptop. He feels relief. The cost comes 3 months later, when he wonders what might have happened if he kept going. And this pattern isn't limited to creative work. It can happen when someone studies for a career change and stops when the material becomes difficult. It can happen when someone starts dating seriously and withdraws when emotional vulnerability appears. It can happen when someone starts exercising, misses a few sessions, feels ashamed about losing momentum, and decides it's easier to start over Monday. The surface behavior looks different. The emotional mechanism can be remarkably similar. The uncomfortable feeling arrives. Avoidance removes it. And because the relief is immediate, the behavior becomes easier to repeat. But there is another layer. Sometimes we don't abandon the goal itself. We abandon the version of ourselves who has to struggle toward it. Before Daniel began making videos, he could imagine himself as a future creator. After he began, he had to become a beginner. And being a beginner is psychologically expensive for people who have become attached to the idea of being naturally capable. Suddenly, progress is slow. Your first attempt looks amateurish. Someone younger than you is already better. Someone who started later seems to be moving faster. Your fantasy said, "This could be amazing." Reality says, "Right now you're not very good." That gap can create what psychologists sometimes describe through concepts such as self-handicapping and perfectionistic thinking. Ways of protecting self-esteem from a possibility that a genuine effort might produce disappointing evidence about our abilities. Again, this isn't a diagnosis, and it isn't the explanation for everyone. But consider how strangely comforting it can be to say, "I never really tried." Because if you never really tried, you never have to find out what your limits actually are. You can preserve the possibility. I could have done it. I probably would have been good at it. I just didn't have the time. The unfinished project can become a strange kind of psychological shelter. The moment you finish it, reality gets a vote. Daniel eventually notices something. He has been waiting to feel motivated again. But motivation isn't arriving. And perhaps that's because he has misunderstood what the feeling means. The disappearance of novelty doesn't necessarily mean the goal was wrong. The beginning of almost anything contains discovery, new equipment, new ideas, new possibilities. But eventually the exciting question, "What could this become?" gets replaced by the less exciting question, "Can I tolerate doing this when it isn't exciting?" That's where many dreams become ordinary. And ordinary is where they become real. Daniel doesn't need to force himself to feel passionate every morning. He needs to notice something much smaller. The exact moment when discomfort turns into escape. One evening, he opens the unfinished video. He immediately wants to close it. Instead of asking, "Do I still want this?" he asks, "What am I feeling right now?" It's frustration, a little embarrassment, a little uncertainty, and underneath all of it, the possibility that the video might simply not be very good. Nothing dangerous is happening, but his mind has been treating discomfort as a signal to retreat. So he doesn't promise to finish the video. He edits 30 seconds. That's all. 30 seconds is small enough that the emotional threat changes, and that matters. When a task feels psychologically enormous, reducing its size can make it easier to approach rather than escape. The goal isn't to trick yourself into becoming productive. It's to lower the emotional barrier enough that you can remain in contact with the thing you're avoiding. The next day, he edits another minute. The video is still mediocre, but something has changed. He is learning a skill that has almost nothing to do with video editing. He's learning that discomfort can exist without requiring escape. He can be uncertain and continue. He can be imperfect and continue. He can be bad at something without turning that fact into a verdict about who he is. That may be the deeper shift. Not learning how to force yourself forward forever. Learning how to stay present for the part where the fantasy disappears and reality begins. Because there will always be a moment when something you want stops feeling like a dream and starts feeling like work. The notebook becomes a stack of difficult pages. The gym becomes a place where progress is measured slowly. The business becomes a series of unanswered emails. The relationship becomes vulnerable conversations instead of romantic possibility. The career change becomes rejection letters. The dream becomes specific, and specific things can fail. That's why abandoning something can sometimes feel strangely protective. You don't have to discover whether you were capable. You don't have to face judgment. You don't have to measure the distance between who you imagine becoming and who you are today. You can simply walk away. And for a little while, you feel lighter, until the goal comes back to mind, usually at the inconvenient moments, while driving, while lying in bed, when you see someone else doing the thing you once wanted to do, and you wonder whether you really didn't want it, or whether you just didn't know how to tolerate what one it required. The old notebook is still in Daniel's drawer. The pages aren't filled with proof that he failed. They're filled with evidence of a moment when the emotional cost of continuing became greater than he knew how to handle. Understanding that doesn't excuse abandoning it. It changes the question. Instead of asking, "What's wrong with me?" he can ask something more useful. What feeling am I trying to escape right now? Maybe it's boredom. Maybe uncertainty. Maybe embarrassment. Maybe the possibility of discovering that progress will take longer than you imagined. And once you can see the feeling clearly, you have another choice. You don't have to feel motivated. You don't have to feel confident. You don't even have to believe you're going to succeed. You only have to become a little less willing to let temporary discomfort make permanent decisions. Because perhaps the goal was never the thing you were running from. Perhaps sometimes you were running from what pursuing it might make you feel. And that changes everything. Sometimes walking away isn't proof that you stop caring. Sometimes it's proof that you care enough to be afraid. The question is whether you can stay long enough to find out what comes after the fear. Sometimes the dream is safer unfinished.